Welcome to XRTV Victoria. I'm Mark Nykanen. We gratefully acknowledge that we live and work as guests on the unceded, unsurrendered lands of the Bosanich, Lekwungen, and Willamette people. Our first story tonight is about food insecurity and food waste. They go hand in hand in much of the developed world. In Canada, we waste about 2 million tons of food a year, according to the National Zero Waste Council. That produces about 10 million tons of carbon dioxide. To put that into perspective, it's like adding an extra 2 million cars to the road each year. Our first story begins with a video cliche. You've probably seen it before, dumpster diving. But this time that cliche has a twist.
Lee Block scavenges for food in Victoria.
I think it's important too to know that we're going to be cooking a lot of this food for the public, so we have to make sure everything's all sanitary.
Lee's been doing this for 15 years. He finds a lot of food worth saving, but it's not for himself. It's part of the anarchist effort to feed the hungry and unhoused in Victoria, British Columbia's capital city. Lee's mining these bins for sustenance. Think of him as a first responder for the hungry.
I knew tons of people, either on streets or just friends. Not everyone can afford to feed themselves, or at least to the extent that they would like. And so just sharing this knowledge and abundance was really important to myself and a lot of others.
What he finds surprises him, not always in a good way.
It's shameful, because we work so hard our entire lives to get ahead, save money, to be able to afford things that we want. And to come across so much food in the dumpsters, it's shameful.
Lee quickly got involved with Food Not Bombs, an international organization dedicated to redirecting resources from military hardware to providing free vegan and vegetarian food to those in need.
It's an anarchist organization. It's community run and organized. Everyone who's involved has a say in how things are done. Just the name Food Not Bombs shows that we're spending far too much resources on war and weaponry and machines to control us or other countries. We should be using that to at least feed ourselves.
And to try to save the planet, a lot of food waste turns into those greenhouse gases that turbocharge the climate crisis.
Our landfills are getting filled up. Not everyone is separating their food. It is naturally on its own creating greenhouse gases. So why not be creating soil so we can grow our food more locally?
Local farms are helping out. The owners of Madrona Farms in the Blenkinsop Valley near Victoria donate food to Lee and Food Not Bombs. He routinely stops by to gather their produce.
I basically came by to pick up some boxes of produce to bring to a kitchen that will be happening at a community member's house tomorrow. And then, we're going to be using the food to make a meal for the public.
Lee asked us to take a box of his harvest over to his compadres in a Food Not Bombs kitchen where volunteers spend Sundays preparing meals.
Herbs here, and our tangerines, apples, some green peppers, broccoli, carrots. So there you go.
Oh, look, here's some more greens for the salad. We can use this in the salad.
Martin, Jim, and Allison are cooking for about 30 people, many unhoused. For years now, this is how they've spent their Sundays.
The food they prepare and give away always brings smiles, gratitude that fuels their political passions.
The only way we're ever going to bring down this crazy system that is destroying the planet is when we bring the people up from the bottom. And we make the people on the bottom so strong and so big that the top just tumbles.
In the meantime, grassroots efforts are working hard to ease hunger. They include the most recent entry, Red Cedar Cafe. Its acting executive director is Liz Mays.
Yeah, so we started mid-April in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, just recognizing a heightened need in our community for healthy, affordable meals. A lot of the shelters also had to reduce their services during this time because they couldn't adhere to the policies and restrictions.
So you kind of popped up out of nowhere right at the beginning of the pandemic and went to work? That's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, well, a lot of people were getting laid off, especially folks in the hospitality industry. So everyone wanted to use their skills, wanted to support the community. So we all just banded together and volunteered, and we started reaching out to different bakeries and different grocery stores. We started getting a lot of food donations, a lot of volunteers in. And yeah, just cooking as much as we could and delivering it to people's doorstep pretty much contactless.
Red Cedar started with 15 volunteers. Now there are more than 300.
Our volunteers are our greatest ambassadors as well. They're the ones who are just talking to the community members. And we've gotten such great feedback from the folks receiving the meals as well, is that the people who are delivering their food they're always so pleasant and very just smiley and wonderful and kind. And it, like, when you're stuck at home, isolated, to get a smile and a warm meal is like very heartwarming. Yeah.
Red Cedar Cafe now puts out about 2,200 meals each week. These aren't peanut butter and jelly sandwiches either.
Let's talk about your menu, because one of the things that really struck me when I went to your website is I thought, this sounds like a very classy restaurant.
Yeah, it's really cool in that sense. Had like very high quality chefs creating these meals. The menus are changed weekly based off of the produce that we get donated. We always try to make sure that they're very high in nutrition as well as delicious.
Patrons can go to an online menu and pick out what they'd like to eat. They can make a donation for the meal or accept it for free. Regardless, Mays points out that it's not a charity model because many of the people receiving the aid are also volunteering at Red Cedar.
So it really is like mutual aid in action. We're heartened by the outpouring of support from the community. We, up until quite recently, we didn't have any major funders. It was all just donations of raw ingredients, of volunteer labor, and of cash donations from organizations and individuals, just supporting the project because they want to support each other and support the community and nourish each other during these really tough times.
In general, where does the food come from that you're processing, that you're cooking, that you're distributing?
Yeah, so we rescue about 500 kilograms of food each week, and they're coming from various grocery stores. There's the Mustard Seed Foundation has a food rescue distribution center, so we've partnered with them, 2 grocery stores, and a number of bakeries around the city.
May says Red Cedar has seen a rising demand for its meals.
What does that say to you about food insecurity around here?
Yeah, well, it's a food insecurity is a real issue, and I don't want anyone to think for a second that Red Cedar is the solution to food insecurity. I think it's just really putting focus on that this is an issue that's not only we're seeing here in Victoria, but we see everywhere across the country. I think it's 1 in 7 people in Canada are facing food insecurity right now. And so it's not a problem of food scarcity, it's a problem of distribution. What we're doing here is just trying to help out the community, but it's by no means a solution. I think it's about 5.5 million Canadians right now are food insecure. And we're just trying to help each other out, but you know, this is a problem of capitalism and colonialism. This is not, the charity model is not gonna fix anything. Food is a human right, and we're a food justice organization. So we're gonna do what we can to make sure everyone has access to healthy meals, while also speaking loudly that this is a systemic issue.
Red Cedar Cafe has been on the move from downtown Victoria to their new location at this former motel. When it comes to fighting hunger in the greater Victoria area, it's all hands on deck, from anarchists to the biggest grocery store chain on Vancouver Island, Thrifty Foods.
This
Is there vegetables or?
Lettuce. With our partnership, with the Food Rescue Network and the Mustard Seed and our participating business partners, there's about 10,000 pounds each day that gets diverted from landfills that's used in the food banks and food programs.
10,000 pounds?
Yeah, it's a remarkable amount of food that's actually been recovered and is actually being put to use before it's destroyed.
What about the carbon footprint of not having it go into a landfill?
Oh, it's significant. Yeah, absolutely significant. You think 10,000 pounds of anything that has to go into the landfills, being able to divert that back to be consumed by people, in need. It's truly a great story.
You'll recall that we began this report with a video cliché, dumpster diving. In the end, we will not indulge in another one, featuring people who are food insecure saying how grateful they are for getting help. That's because we at XRTV believe very strongly that food is a right, not a privilege. For food insecure people, food should not be a gift, it should be a given. For the Indigenous, food insecurity is an even more serious issue, and it has roots that go back centuries. That's according to Jeff Corntassel of the Cherokee Nation. He's an associate professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Victoria on Vancouver Island and an associate director of the Center for Indigenous Research and Community-Led Engagement at UVic.
This is your field.
Yeah.
What has colonialism done to Indigenous food safety and security?
Yeah, I think of colonization as an ongoing process, so it's still going on, but it's a way of depriving Indigenous peoples from their connections to land and community and culture. And so there's been colonization that has occurred around disease. So disease has displaced people from the land. It's devastated Indigenous populations. And then there's that detachment from the land itself through removal or dispossession, and also confinement to reserves. And so the land itself is part of our relationship. And in that sense, the relationship has been challenged, and Indigenous peoples have been criminalized based on their defense of the land, based on their relationships.
Talk about that criminalization. How has that taken place, and how is it taking place now?
Yeah, I think previously it's taken place in terms of confining people to the reserve system through the pass system. And so confining or limiting motion or movement, outline potlatch systems, so outline an important part of the economy, but also outline or limiting hunting and fishing, right? And so the way it's taking place today, I would say, is kind of the criminalization or limiting of fishing that we're seeing in Mi'kmaq, for example, and the East Coast. So basically the racism that's going on there is a challenge to basically treaty-based rights to fish for lobster. And the amount of lobster that's being taken is a small percentage relative to the commercial fisheries. And yet that's being diminished, or that's being challenged.
What was your reaction when you saw what was happening with the Mi'kmaq?
It was anger. I think it was kind of like, why do we have to continue to fight these same battles? This is a treaty-based right to fish for a moderate livelihood. It was upheld by the Supreme Court, right, in 1999, and yet this encroachment, this criminalization of Mi'kmaq has continued.
It's interesting when you talk about the Mi'kmaq, because so often and in so many ways Native people have been pushed off their lands, but here we see them being pushed off from their seed, their actual livelihood there.
Yeah.
And what really strikes me is, we were talking earlier, that you and your family actually know what that means. It's baked into who you are.
Yeah. So I'm from Cherokee Nation, and my family is from Lookout Point, Georgia, and then even Tocqueville, Tennessee. And we were forcibly removed in 1838 to Westville, Oklahoma. So that's a 900-mile journey. Took a lot of lives. It was called the Trail of Tears for a good reason. And one of the things I want to stress too is that it wasn't just Cherokee that were removed. So there are about 50 other indigenous nations that were removed to this place called Oklahoma. And so our family ended up in Westville, Oklahoma. And then we had kind of a second removal in the 1930s, people looking for work, and to places like California and to other places. So I was born in California, right? And so a lot of the reconnection that I've made, that my daughter is a key part of that, is to reconnect the family in Oklahoma, as well as to maintain those relations on the West Coast.
I think one of the painful ironies when we look particularly here in the Pacific Northwest is that historically First Nations people had plenitude. My understanding is they could, by May, have enough fish put away to take them for another year. There were potlucks, as you mentioned, and so forth. And now, I heard recently, you correct me if I'm wrong, but that 1 out of every 2 Indigenous children in this country is food insecure.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a result of this ongoing deprivation from the land. And so you can factor in residential schools there too, right? In terms of, I heard an interesting saying the other day that at first, basically children were taken from the land, and now the land's being taken from the children, right? And so in the sense, right, we've seen this shift where you take people out of their kinship networks, you take them out of their family and put them into an alien system in order to try to assimilate, right? You've shifted that relationship. So people aren't going to necessarily hunt and fish. They're not going to speak the language in the same way. So it's that challenge to reclaim those relationships and keep us healthy. And so I would say that what we see today is really an outgrowth of that people are not able to provide in the same way because they're confined to smaller and smaller places, because in some cases the rivers are polluted, so you can't take fish from the river. In some cases, the salmon is so regulated by Department of Fisheries that you can't take salmon only within a very narrow window. And so it's really, and then you think of Mi'kmaq, you see the culmination of that is we're not able to actually provide on the land because of all this encroachment, because of this interference in our ways of being, in our food systems.
Because of these limited reserves that often exist, and because they're so often adjacent to environmentally compromised lands, we have this odd interplay, and maybe it's very predictable, of racism and environmental degradation. Does this, in your experience, really hit hard among Native peoples?
Absolutely. I think the what we see today with extractive industries. So we're seeing in Wet'suwet'en, for example, the Wet'suwet'en people are fighting to keep CGL, Coastal GasLink, off their land, and we see this with Secwepemc, Secwepemc people fighting to keep the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion off their land, because they see the devastation that it brings and the environmental degradation. When we think about the land and the water, that's really our future. We don't think of it as, our future is a pipeline investment or our future is logging. The land and water relationships are actually our future. And so to compromise that future, especially when you think about how valuable water is and how valuable, that water is to our health and well-being, we can't compromise that.
I was speaking to a council member of the Saywell Nation recently, and she said something that was really striking. She said, why is it that the federal government pays to bring bottled water onto so many reserves, but still can't fulfill its promise to clean the water and provide clean water?
That's a
and there was a real poignancy to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that strikes at the heart of this discussion, right? Why are, I think it was 110 communities are in boil water advisories, right? Why can't these communities have safe drinking water, which is a basic human right? And we think about the devastation of that water. And really, I think a key part of this conversation is what happens to the land also happens to our bodies, right? So if the land is sick, our bodies as Indigenous peoples are also going to be sick, right? And so that's why we fight so hard, because of our love for the land and our love for our communities.
Jeff Corntassel says the allocation of resources for Indigenous peoples in North America is tragically upside down.
We need to get away from this model where, and this is in Canada as well as the US, where we spend more money policing Indigenous peoples and trying to keep us off of our land and off of the water, where that money could go to much more useful things. And so I'm looking at Mi'kmaq, I'm looking at Stalo, I'm looking at all these different places where millions of dollars are being spent to keep us off of the land. And for what purpose, right? It's preventing our food security and our long-term sustainable practices.
Bitter iron.
Yes. If you ever want to close down the conversation, you say you're on stolen Indigenous land, or if you say, if you remind people of the doctrine of discovery, which is, linked to the claims of territory today of Canada, the U.S., we could look at many other countries. That is the legacy. And so when we talk about the founding of Canada or the founding of the U.S. or founding of other countries, it's based on that violence and it's based on that erasure of Indigenous peoples. I think for a lot of folks that's too much to process, especially in Canada, this myth of the peacemaker, and that's not who we are. And certainly that may not be what people embody right now, but they're benefiting from that loss of land. They're benefiting from that colonization that displaced thousands of Indigenous peoples from their land and killed thousands of Indigenous peoples.
We're going to end with a beautifully produced video of a poem by Kathy Jetnell Kitchener and Aka Niviana. These young poets come from vastly different parts of the world, but they share a common crisis, the one that afflicts us all. The poem is called Rise, From One Island to Another, and it comes to us from the good people at 350.org.
Sister of ice and snow, I'm coming to you from the land of my ancestors, from atolls, sunken volcanoes, undersea descent of sleeping giants.
Sister of ocean and sand, I welcome you to the land of my ancestors, to the land where they sacrificed their lives to make mine possible, to the land of survivors.
I'm coming to you from the land my ancestors chose. Kainan, Marshall Islands, a country more sea than land.
I welcome you to Greenland, the biggest island on earth.
With me I bring these shells that I picked from the shores of Bikini Atoll and Brunette Dome.
In my hand I hold these rocks, picked from the shores of Nuuk, the foundation of the land I call my home.
With these shells I bring with me a story of long ago. Two sisters frozen in time on the island of Wuyai. One magically turned to stone. The other who chose that life to be rooted by her sister's side. To this day, the two sisters can be seen by the edge of the reef, a lesson in permanence.
With these rocks I bring a story told countless times, a story about Sesuma Amna, mother of the sea, who lives in a cave at the bottom of the ocean. This is a story about the guardian of the sea. She sees the greed in our hearts, the disrespect in our eyes. Every whale, every stream, every iceberg are her children. When we disrespect them, she gives us what we deserve, a lesson in respect. Do we deserve the melting ice, the hungry polar bears coming to our islands, or the colossal icebergs hitting these waters with rage. From one island to another,
I ask for solutions. From one island to another,
I ask for your problems.
let me show you the tide, coming for us faster than we'd like to admit. Let me show you airports underwater, bulldozed reefs, blasted sands, and plans to build new atolls, forcing land from an ancient rising sea, forcing us to imagine turning ourselves to stone.
Can you see our glaciers grown with the weight of the world's heat? I wait for you, here on the land of my ancestors, heart heavy with a continuous thirst for solutions. As I watch this land change while the world remains silent.
Sister of ice and snow, I come to you now, in grief.
Mourning landscapes that are always forced to change. First, through wars inflicted on us.
Then through nuclear waste dumped in our waters.
On our ice.
And now,
this. Sister of ocean and sand, I offer you these rocks, the foundation of my home. May the same unshakable foundation connect us, make us stronger than these colonizing monsters that still to this day devour our lives. The very same beasts that now decide who should live,
who should die. Sister of ice and snow, I offer you these shells and the story of the two sisters as testament, as declaration that despite what we are told, we will not leave. We will choose stone. We will choose to be rooted to this reef forever. From these islands,
we ask for solutions.
From these islands,
we ask, we demand that the world see beyond
ACs, SUVs, their pre-packaged convenience, their oil-slick dreams.
Beyond the belief that tomorrow will never happen, that this is merely an inconvenient truth.
Let me bring my home to yours.
Let's watch as Miami, New York, Shanghai, Amsterdam, London, Rio de Janeiro, and Osaka try to breathe underwater. You think you have decades before your home fall beneath tides?
We have years, we have months before you sacrifice us again, before you watch from your TV screens and computer screens to see if we will still be breathing while you do nothing.
My sister, I offer you these rocks as a reminder that our lives matter more than their power. That life in all form demands the same respect we all give to money.
That these issues will affect each and every one of us. None of us is immune.
And that each and every one of us has to decide if we will rise.
Thank you for joining us. In the new year, may we all rise. Take care.